stars on the Big Dipper point toward the little North Star.
When the sun goes down, the workday is over for most people, but for astronomers it's just beginning. As twilight drains from the sky and the stars sprinkle across the firmament, they prepare to probe the mysteries of the universe from McDonald Obseratory. Astronomers have studied the heavens from this remote West Texas site since the 1930s. The telescopes are bigger now, and the creature comforts a little more plentiful. But the mission is the same: to understand our universe and our place in it, and to pass on this knowledge to students and to the world at large. That mission was established by William J. McDonald, a banker in Paris, Texas. When he died in 1926, he left his estate to the University of Texas to build and equip a first-class astronomical observatory.
His heirs thought that he was obviously crazy to give all this money to astronomy and contested the will, and it was tied up in a court fight for some years. And the university ended up with about $800,000 after the fight was over, and with that original $800,000 built the first telescope, the 82-inch telescope, and the houses around the top of the mountain. Initially, the astronomy program at Texas was operated by the University of Chicago because when William McDonald gave his money, the university had no astronomy program, no astronomy department. After all, this was kind of a surprise in Texas to receive such a great legacy. So the University of Chicago agreed to operate McDonald Observatory for an initial period of time and sent astronomers down from Chicago to use the telescopes and work here.
Well, beginning in the 40s, after the telescope was dedicated, an astronomer in Chicago, the principal users of the observatory, would take the train from Chicago to Alpine and then get a ride from Alpine up here to the observatory and literally live in the telescope dome for an observing run that might last weeks to a month or more. He would cook his own meals, he would do all of his observing, and would literally live here on the mountain with some assistance from a very small staff at that time while his observing program took place. So it was an entirely different arrangement from today's astronomer who may fly into the observatory, stay here for 3 or 4 nights of observing and fly home. Those days were, it was much more of an undertaking in those days than it is now.
McDonald's first director was Otto Struve, who also directed Chicago's Yerkes Observatory. He picked the site for McDonald Observatory, and he guided design and construction of the 82-inch telescope. When it was completed in 1939, it was the second largest in the world. With this giant new telescope and a world-class team of astronomers, McDonald established itself as one of the most productive observatories in the world.
We're guiding. It was complete.
Astronomers of 100 years ago had to be reasonably hardy. They would sit glued to the eyepiece with their eyes out there, no matter how cold it was or what hour of the night, and it was quite physical. Today, we've got it a little bit better. We don't have to be out in the cold dome, sitting with our eye in an eyepiece. Instead, we have a camera, a TV camera, which is trained to look at the object, and we are able to therefore keep the telescope pointed exactly where we want it to be pointed. And we're sitting down in a control room, which is relatively warm, and looking at computer screens all night long. The instrument itself is attached to the telescope, and the light goes through the telescope to the instrument, and the instrument collects the data for us.
A telescope is often described as a bucket for gathering light. The bigger the bucket, the more light it gathers, which means it sees objects that are fainter and farther away. Most modern research telescopes, like those at McDonald, are reflecting telescopes. A carefully polished mirror gathers light from stars, galaxies, and planets. The size of a reflecting telescope is measured by the diameter of this mirror. The 82-inch telescope, for example, has a mirror that's 82 inches across. In the metric system, that's 2.1 meters. Texas took over sole operation of McDonald in the early 1960s. It added an astronomy department at the Austin campus and hired a new director, an energetic Ivy Leaguer named Harlan J. Smith, to run both the department and the observatory. Like Struve, Smith immediately set out to build a new telescope. The 107-inch telescope was dedicated in 1968. With 2 smaller instruments, that gave McDonald 4 telescopes, all of which are still in use today. Another telescope was added in the 1980s. It uses laser beams to measure the distance from Earth to the Moon and to track the slow drift of Earth's continents. McDonald's largest telescope was dedicated in 1997. It's called the Hobby-Eberly Telescope, or HET for short. Like many modern astronomy projects, it's an international collaboration involving 5 universities in the United States and Germany.
Hobby-Eberly Telescope is the 3rd largest telescope in the world. It's a very innovative design. There's never been a telescope built like this before. So it was a real challenge to bring it to completion, but we managed to do that. It has a 10 meter by 11 meter primary mirror. That is, it's 10 meters wide by 11 meters tall, comprised of 91 individual segments. So the primary mirror is really 91 mirrors that work together. These create an image at the top of the telescope that is corrected by a further set of 4 mirrors that then send the light into a fiber that takes the light down to the basement and feeds it into a spectrograph. So the Ely Telescope literally is the front end of a spectrograph.
Spectroscopy splits the light from an astronomical object up into different colors, and detailed examination of the colors can tell you things like the temperature, the composition of the gas that's emitting the light, how fast the star or galaxy is moving away or towards us. So most people think of astronomy as a series of pretty pictures of galaxies or stars, and information is gathered from those pictures, but in order to get a more detailed look, an understanding of an astronomical object, invariably one needs spectroscopy, and the Ely Telescope was designed specifically for spectroscopy.
The other telescopes use spectrographs too, but they also use instruments that measure the intensity of the light from astronomical objects or capture spectacular images of the sky. While the equipment is important, McDonald could not operate without a large support staff.
And the observatory is very definitely a 24-hour operation. During the day, the staff who lives and works here at McDonald in West Texas put the telescopes together, rearrange the parts, get the instruments ready, prepare the cameras, get the computers, make sure the computers are working. They do all the prep work so that when the scientists come to the telescope at night, they can work efficiently and well.
Staff members not only support the observatory's scientific operations, they also help explain the beauty of the night sky to more than 100,000 visitors each year. The focal point for these programs is the McDonald Visitor Center, which was dedicated in 2002. It offers an amphitheater and telescopes for star parties, exhibits on the observatory and its mission, and other amenities. The center also makes it possible for the observatory to provide special workshops for teachers and students from all across Texas and the nation.
We've actually brought together the best that Texas schools and McDonald Observatory have to offer into a science standard-based education program for student field experiences for K through 12 students, as well as accredited teacher professional development workshops and elder hostel programs.
Most McDonald Observatory astronomers live and work in Austin. They apply for time to use one of the telescopes, then visit McDonald for several days at a stretch. McDonald astronomers also collaborate with scientists around the world.
For example, I have a long-term collaboration with colleagues in Sweden. They have skills in the construction of atmospheric models for stars, if you like, stellar weather. And they also have access to the Southern Hemisphere, to the European Southern Observatory's telescopes. And so we combine our talents.
No matter where they are, McDonald Observatory astronomers study just about every type of object in the heavens, from normal stars to exploding stars to the tiniest members of our own solar system.
I think that by far the strongest program we have is built on the legacy of Otto Struve's work on stellar spectroscopy with the 82-inch in the 40s. And that is the program of stellar spectroscopy, now largely conducted with the 107-inch telescope, and to a lesser extent with the 82-inch telescope, and on the Ely Telescope. And this program is intended to help us understand how stars are made, how they change with time, how they move through space, what's in the space between us and those stars, what's the composition of that intervening material, how does that material behave, how does that material change with time.
Supernovae are the catastrophic endpoint of a star. Certain kinds of stars, they're an explosion that blows the star up. And so they're interesting for a number of levels. Supernovae produce all the heavy elements that are blown out into space, and so making the rocks and the planets and the iron and oxygen in our blood and the calcium in our bones have all come out of supernovae, so we can trace sort of where we come from back to these sorts of things. More recently, we've learned how to use them just as bright signposts that you can measure how far away they are, and we use that to map out the universe.
The interest in comets and asteroids and the primitive bodies of the solar system is because these are debris left over from when the solar system formed 4.5 billion years ago. On the Earth, we have things like